The first thing Nora found was not a document, or a deed, or a hidden box of money. It was the letter W, a blackened piece of lead, no longer than her thumb, lying face up in a trail of ash beside the old printing press. Then she found an I under a broken floorboard, then a D wedged inside a cracked drawer, then 3 more letters tucked into places no fire could have thrown them by chance. To anyone else, they were scrap. To Nora, they were language. Her mother had taught her that years ago, in whispers, before her father locked the books away, and told both of them that a woman's thoughts were safer when they stayed unwritten. Nora had not touched printer's type since the funeral. She had tried to forget the feel of cold lead against her fingertips, but now she stood alone in a burned shop everyone wanted condemned, reading a message from a room that should have held nothing but smoke and ruin. Outside, a lawyer waited in the street, offering more money than the place was worth. Inside, the letters pointed toward a wall where the smoke stain was shaped like a hand. Nora reached for the next piece of type, and the shop seemed to hold its breath. 2 days before Nora Bellamy found the first letter in the ashes, her father threw her suitcase into the rain, with half her clothes still hanging from its open mouth. It hit the porch steps and spilled stockings into the mud. Nora did not bend for them. Inside the parlor, her father stood beneath her mother's portrait. Behind him, Thomas Voss waited in a dark coat, too polished for a storm, too quiet for a man who had just been refused. "You will apologize," her father said. Nora's wet hair clung to her cheek. "No." The word was small, but it changed the room. Thomas looked down at his gloves. Her father's mouth tightened with the shame of being disobeyed before the wrong witness. Gideon Voss had not come himself. He never did when another person could press harder for him. But his son's carriage stood at the curb, and Nora understood the bargain. If she married Thomas, her father would keep his place near the courthouse. Thomas would inherit a grateful wife, and Nora would spend her life lowering her eyes before men who called silence virtue. "Your mother knew how to be respected," her father said. Nora looked at the portrait. Eleanor Bellamy had been painted with a closed mouth and folded hands. Beneath Nora's collar rested her mother's silver hairpin. 2 tiny letters had been scratched into its back. E.B. When Nora was 9, her mother had used that pin to point at rows of backward type in a printer's tray. In the kitchen after dusk, Eleanor had shown her that letters could look wrong and still tell the truth if a person knew how to read them. "A printed word has to be trusted before it can be feared," her mother had whispered. After the funeral, her father locked away every book with Eleanor's notes, and told Nora that women who filled their heads with arguments ended lonely. Now he opened the front door wider. "Then I suppose I am already trained for it," Nora said. For 1 second, Thomas smiled. Her father saw it. "You are no daughter of mine while you speak like that." The words landed cleaner than a slap. By dusk, Fairhaven knew. By morning, no boarding house had a room. Mrs. Vale at the dry goods counter would not meet Nora's eyes. The baker's wife only whispered, "A girl alone must be careful who she offends." Nora had $14.37, a torn suitcase, 1 change of clothes, and the hairpin under her collar. At noon, she followed the auction bell to Printer's Lane. The Bell and Sparrow print shop stood at the dead end like something buried and forgotten. Its sign hung crooked. 1 window was boarded. The other held cracked glass. Rainwater dripped through the roof and struck the floor in hollow taps. The auctioneer read from the street. Structural damage, unpaid taxes, no warranty, no guarantee of safety, no furnishings of value except miscellaneous metal scrap too troublesome to remove. A man laughed. "Sell it for kindling." "Kindling already had its turn," someone said. Nora looked through the open doorway. Beneath soot, the old iron press remained upright. Its handle was scorched. Its rollers were gone. But the frame had not buckled. Beside it, tilted against the wall, were the type cases. Most people saw drawers of ruined lead. Nora saw compartments, discipline, order disturbed but not erased. She lifted her hand before fear could lower it. $11, she said. The crowd turned. Someone muttered that Bellamy's girl had gone from stubborn to simple. No one bid against her because they could not imagine wanting what she wanted. When the key touched her palm, Gideon Voss crossed the street. He moved without hurry, a tall man in a charcoal suit, carrying an umbrella he did not seem to need. His eyes passed over the broken sign, the sagging roof, the scorched windows. Then they settled on Nora, and his face arranged itself into sympathy. "Miss Bellamy," he said, This has been a difficult week. It has been instructive. His smile thinned. A building like this is dangerous, taxable, and useless to a young woman with no household. My firm could relieve you of it today. For $11? For 50. The men near the street went quiet. Nora should have felt triumph. Instead, the offer settled cold in her stomach. Gideon Voss did not overpay for pity. I just bought it, she said, and I am advising you not to touch what is inside. There it was. Not the roof. Not the lot. Not the press. Inside. Nora turned the key once. What, exactly? Should I not touch? For the first time, Gideon's courtesy cracked. His gaze flicked through the doorway, not to the press, but to the tilted wall of type cases. Old debris, he said. Burned drawers. Lead dust. Things that can poison a careless hand. My hands have survived worse than dust. Before Gideon could answer, wheels struck a puddle. Nora's father had arrived in his black buggy, face pale with fury. Sell it, he said. No. His jaw moved once. Do not drag your mother's memory through this filth. Nora felt the hairpin against her skin. My mother never feared ink. Her father's eyes changed so quickly, she almost missed it. Not grief, not anger. Recognition. He knew something about this place. Then the cracked bell above the print shop door gave a small sound, though no wind had touched it. Everyone heard it. Nora opened the door and stepped inside. The room smelled of wet ash, rust, and old paper. Behind her, Gideon said her name once. Her father said nothing. Nora closed the door. In the sudden dimness, something tiny slipped from the underside of the front counter and struck the floor with a sound like a dropped tooth. A single piece of lead type lay at her feet. It had not been there when she entered. Nora did not pick up the piece of type at once. She stood with her back against the closed door and listened to the rain tap through the broken roof. Outside, wheels rolled away slowly. Her father first. Then, after a pause, Gideon Voss. Only when the street was quiet did she crouch. The lead block was cold enough to sting. Its face was blackened, but the raised letter beneath the soot was clear when she rubbed it against her sleeve. An R. Backward. She set it on the counter and looked around the shop she had just bought. Water had warped the floorboards. Charred newspapers clung to the corners like dead leaves. A cabinet had collapsed, spilling drawers of type into a gray heap. The ceiling sagged over the rear room, and every puddle carried a slick reflection of the press. For $11, Nora had bought 4 walls that could kill her in her sleep. So she worked before fear could make an argument. She dragged broken glass into a flour sack. She shoved boards beneath the worst leak and pulled a torn canvas over the gap above the press. She found a broom burned down one side and swept a path from the door to the counter. By twilight, her hands were cut, her skirt was streaked with ash, and the shop smelled less like death than labor. Behind the press, she found a small cast-iron stove. The pipe was crooked, the grate cracked, but when she cleared the ash, she discovered dry kindling wrapped in newspaper inside the firebox. Someone had placed it there carefully, away from the damp. Nora stopped. The newspaper around the kindling was not as old as the fire. She unfolded one brittle edge and saw only 3 printed words before the rest tore apart. Widow petition denied. The phrase felt less like news than a door left ajar. She tucked the scrap into her bodice beside the hairpin. Near dusk, a knock struck the door. Sheriff Abel Crow stood beneath the awning, rain dripping from his hat. Evening, Miss Bellamy. Your father says you may be occupying an unsafe structure. My father no longer speaks for my roof. Roof is generous. He looked past her. County can condemn a hazard, especially one bought under emotional distress. Is that a law? It can become a problem. He handed her a damp paper. Inspection notice. 48 hours. Nora read the words twice. The sheriff watched her mouth move, and his eyes flicked once toward the counter where the single R lay. He saw it. More than that, he recognized it. Lead dust is dangerous, he said. So, I've heard. Don't go digging in drawers that should stay shut. The same warning, dressed in a badge. After he left, Nora bolted the door with bent iron and spent the night on the counter beneath her coat. Rain clicked into buckets. Wood groaned. Once, close to dawn, she thought she heard a drawer slide open. By morning, hunger had made her hands tremble. She found a pump behind the shop that gave brown water at first, then clear. She washed her face, drank until her stomach hurt, and returned with a tin pail. The front counter drawer was open. Nora froze. She had bolted the door. She had wedged a chair beneath the rear latch. Yet the drawer she had closed before sleeping now stood out 3 inches. The R was still on the counter, but the ash around it bore a clean mark where fingers had searched. Not for money. There was none. For type. The broken window above the paper shelves had a fresh smear in the soot, narrow as a sleeve. Someone had reached in. Her fear sharpened into anger. She dragged every usable type case into the light and began sorting. Her mother had taught her the old layout: capitals in one drawer, lowercase in another, punctuation in shallow boxes. Most letters were damaged, but others had survived with their faces clear, waiting in the wrong compartments. 2 wrong. An A sat among commas. 3 E's rested in the space for numerals. A row of T's had been turned face down, all in the same direction. Fire could scatter. Panic could spill. This was neither. Nora worked until the pattern emerged. She placed the odd letters on the counter beside the R. They did not form a full sentence, only broken pieces. Ehi, I, A, D. Then, after a gap, UN, D, E, R. Her pulse moved into her throat. Read under. Under what? A wagon rattled past outside and slowed. Nora swept the letters into her palm and stepped away from the window. Through a crack in the boards, she saw Gideon Voss's driver looking toward the shop, adjusting a harness that did not need it. Nora waited until he left. Then she returned to the place everyone said the fire had started, the oil cabinet. The story was simple: old oil, hot stove, careless printer, flames. But the oil tins were still stacked inside, their seams unburst, their labels browned but readable. The deepest burn marks were across the room, around the composing table and the locked lower shelves. Someone had not burned the shop by accident. Someone had burned the words. Nora knelt by the composing table. Under its edge, hidden by soot, she found a row of tiny scratches shaped like arrows. She followed them to a loose strip of trim. Behind it lay a second scrap of newsprint, folded so small it looked like a moth wing. Half the line was gone. The remaining words read, "Before the widow can testify." Nora stared at the scrap until the room blurred. Then the cracked front bell gave one soft sound. Not from the door, from the counter. The R had moved. Nora did not sleep after the R moved. She set every loose letter beneath an overturned teacup and sat facing the counter until dawn pushed gray light through the cracked front window. Nothing else shifted. No bell rang, no drawer opened. But the shop no longer felt empty. It felt watched by something left behind. At sunrise, she took a nail from the floor and marked the counter beside each piece of type. If any moved again, she would know. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began studying the shop like a page. Her mother had once told her that a printer's room had a grammar of its own. Heavy things lived near the press. Dry paper lived away from damp walls. Ink stains told habits. Burn marks told lies. Nora started where the official story said the fire began. The oil cabinet was scorched, but not consumed. The tins inside had browned labels, yet their seals were unbroken. The stovepipe had smoke along its mouth, but the deepest blackening climbed from the composing table, spread across the type drawers, and curled toward the locked lower shelves. A careless printer might burn a shop. A careful enemy would burn the place where sentences were born. She crossed to the wall with the smoke stain shaped like a hand. In daylight, it looked less like a stain and more like a print left by someone reaching while the room filled with heat. 5 dark fingers stretched upward. Beneath the lowest one, a nailhead had been driven deeper than the others. Nora pressed it with her thumb. The plank shifted. She worked the board loose, inch by inch, careful not to crack the charred wood. Behind it was a narrow gap packed with soot, mouse droppings, and one folded piece of paper blackened at the edges. Before she could open it, the rear door scraped. Nora seized the fireplace poker. An old man stood in the doorway, thin as a rail, with white hair under a battered cap and a toolbox hanging from one hand. His eyes went first to the loose plank, then to the paper in Nora's fingers. "You shouldn't have opened that," he said. "Then you should not have come through my back door." He almost smiled. "Fair enough. Who are you?" "Silas Gray. I set type here before you were tall enough to reach a case." Nora tightened her grip on the poker. "People say Silas Gray burned this place. People say what lets them sleep." He stepped inside slowly. as if the shop might recognize his weight. When he saw the overturned teacup on the counter and the marked letters beneath it, his face changed. Not surprise. Grief. What did they spell? He asked. Nora did not answer. Silas looked toward the wall. Read under? The poker lifted in her hand. How did you know that? Because I helped hide the first half. The words struck the room harder than thunder. Nora backed away. If you hid it, why didn't you speak when they blamed you? His mouth worked around an old shame. Because blame is lighter than being buried with the truth. She hated him for the sentence before she understood it. The folded paper trembled in her fingers. She opened it carefully on the composing table. Most of the page had burned away, but a corner survived. The paper was thick, cream-colored, better than common notices. At the bottom was a mark in faded ink. E. B. Nora felt the hairpin press against her collarbone as if it had warmed. Silas saw her hand move. Where did you get that pin? My mother's. His face went pale beneath the ash on his cheek. What was her name? Nora heard the warning before he spoke it. A silence widened around the question, the same kind of silence her father had built in their house after the funeral. Nora Bellamy, she said. Silas closed his eyes. Don't say that name here, he whispered. It's my mother's name. It was more than that in this room. Outside, hooves passed slowly along Printer's Lane. Both of them turned toward the sound. A buggy paused at the corner and moved on. Silas waited until the wheels faded. Then he came closer to the table, but he did not touch the paper. This stock was for the Saturday Extra, he said. Not advertisements, not church notices. Something meant to be read before anyone could stop it. What was EB? Silas looked at the hairpin again, and whatever he saw there frightened him more than the poker. Ask your father why he let you keep that, he said. The words went through Nora like cold water. My father barely lets me keep my own name. Then he made one mistake. Nora unfolded the scrap as far as it would go. Above the initials, a partial line remained, printed in uneven type. The widow was declared unfit before the physician saw her. Nora read it twice. This is about a court case. No, Silas said. It is about many. A floorboard creaked above them. Nora looked up. The loft. She had not climbed there yet. The ladder was half burned, leaning against the wall beneath the smoke-hand stain. Silas followed her gaze and shook his head. Not alone, but Nora was already moving. The ladder complained under her weight. Dust fell into her hair. Halfway up, she saw where someone had scratched 2 small letters into the side rail. E. B. This time, they were not written in ink. They had been cut deep with a hairpin. The loft smelled of old paper and wet wood. Broken bundles of newsprint lay under a sheet of canvas. In the far corner, tucked behind a beam, was a wooden-type tray wrapped in black cloth. She pulled it free. Below, Silas whispered her name as if he had heard it from the dead. Inside the tray were no letters, only empty compartments, each labeled by hand. Names. Women's names. Nora touched the first label, and the building answered with 3 hard knocks from the front door. Gideon Voss called from the street. Miss Bellamy, I know Silas Gray is in there. Gideon Voss did not wait for permission. His cane struck the front step once, then again. Each tap measured enough to sound polite and threatening at the same time. Nora climbed down from the loft with the cloth-wrapped tray under one arm. Silas stayed near the composing table. His shoulders bowed as if the years had suddenly remembered him. Open the door, Gideon called. Before the sheriff must. Nora slid the tray beneath a stack of warped newsprint and crossed the room. When she pulled the door inward, Gideon stood in the weak afternoon light with Sheriff Crow behind him and Thomas Voss at the curb, watching the shop as if it had offended him personally. Mr. Gray is wanted for questioning, Gideon said. For what? Trespass. Tampering with condemned property. Perhaps theft, depending on what he has removed. This property is mine. For the moment, the words were soft. They landed hard. Nora stepped aside only enough for Gideon to see Silas, not enough to enter. Gideon's gaze moved over the room in pieces. The loosened wall plank, the composing table, the old press, the type cases. When his eyes reached the loft ladder, they paused too long. Silas coughed. I came to see whether the girl would be crushed under her own roof. A generous habit you have developed late in life, Gideon said. You were less careful the night this place burned. Silas flinched, and Nora saw it. Gideon saw it too. That was why he had said it. Leave him alone, Nora said. Gideon turned his sympathy back on her. "Miss Bellamy, I am trying to leave you alone. I offered you fair money. I can still arrange a room for you in Brighton, a clean one, with references. You need not prove anything to people who have already decided what you are. And what am I? A young woman in grief, confusing ruins for inheritance." Behind him, Thomas shifted, but said nothing. Nora thought of the empty type tray with women's names labeled in compartments, the burned line about a widow declared unfit, and the letters cut into the latter with a hairpin. "This ruin is the first thing I ever bought without asking a man," she said. Gideon's smile did not change, but his eyes cooled. "Then do not make it the thing that buries you." He glanced past her once more. Especially over the surviving trays from the final edition, the shop seemed to tighten around the sentence. Nora kept her face still. "Final edition." Gideon lifted his cane from the step. "A figure of speech. Every failed paper has one." But Silas had gone white. After they left, Nora closed the door slowly and turned the bolt. Silas sat down as if his knees had been cut. "You heard him," Nora said. "I heard. He knows there were trays. He knew before the fire was cold." For the first time, Silas looked at the press not as wreckage, but as something wounded. "Can it run?" Nora asked. He stared at her. "That is a dangerous question. Can it?" He went to the press and laid one trembling hand on the iron frame. "The rollers are gone. The tympan is torn. The feedboard is warped. But the bed is true. The platen is not cracked. The lever still returns." He pulled the handle a little. Metal groaned through the room, low and stubborn. Nora felt the sound in her ribs. "It can run," Silas said. "Not well, not fast, but enough to prove a thing was printed here." That was the first hopeful sentence the shop had given her. They worked until dusk. Silas showed her how to clean the chase without scratching it, how to scrape dried ink from the rails, how to oil the joints one drop at a time. Nora sorted usable type from damaged lead, setting aside letters with faces clear enough to print. She patched the torn tympan with linen from her own petticoat. She tied canvas over the worst hole in the ceiling and fed the stove with broken chair rungs. The shop changed by inches, not repaired. Awake. By lamplight, Silas found a substitute cog in a drawer of machine parts. It did not match, but he filed the edge with slow, patient strokes until it seated against the main gear. Nora held the lamp close. The iron teeth caught, slipped, caught again. "Try," he said. Nora set a scrap of blank paper on the bed. She arranged 4 letters in the chase, not from the hidden message, only 4 common letters no one could fear. T-R-U-E. Silas inked them with the last thick smear from an old tin. Nora lowered the lever. The press resisted, then yielded. When she lifted the paper, the words stared back unevenly, pale at the edges, but readable. "True." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then a noise came from the alley. A board shifted under a foot. Silas blew out the lamp. Nora held the printed scrap against her chest and listened. Something scraped along the rear wall. A hand tested the back latch once, gently, like a question. Silas reached for the poker. Nora moved first. She crossed to the rear room and yanked the door open. The alley was empty. Rain fell from the eaves in thin silver lines. Nothing moved except water running down the ash barrel. But on the ground below the window was a clean heel print where the mud had been disturbed. Someone had stood there long enough to listen. They barred every door with chairs, boards, and one rusted iron rod. Silas wedged through the rear latch. Nora put the printed word "true" beneath the overturned teacup with the marked letters, as if the cup could guard it from the dark. By morning, the shop was colder. Nora woke on the floor with ash in her hair and the sense that something essential had gone quiet. Silas slept in the chair by the stove, one hand closed around the poker. The press stood where it had stood. The word "true" lay where she had left it, but when Nora bent to oil the gear, her fingers touched empty air. The substitute cog was gone. So was the main gear beside it. In the black cup of the oil well, folded tight and slick with grease, was a small paper note. 3 words had been written in pencil. "Don't print yet." Nora read the note until the pencil marks blurred. "Don't print yet." The words did not feel like Gideon. Gideon gave warnings that wore gloves. This was rough, hurried, pressed hard enough to tear the paper. Whoever had written it had been close enough to remove the gears, close enough to stand over the press while Nora slept, and careful enough not to take anything else. Silas woke to the sound of her opening drawers. "What happened?" "The press is mute again." He saw the empty gear housing and the note in her hand. For a moment, shame passed over his face so quickly she might have missed it if she had not already learned to read small things. "You know who did this," she said. "No, that was not a no. That was a door shutting." Silas looked toward the alley window. "Sometimes a door stays shut because the room behind it is full of powder. Then stop lighting matches around me." He did not answer. Nora put the note beside the word true and turned back to the message from the type cases. "Read under." She had followed it to the composing table, to the loose plank, to the loft tray of women's names, but there was another under in a print shop. Under the stone, under the drawer, under the galley where lines were locked before they became public. She knelt beneath the composing table. The lower shelf was black with soot. At first it looked solid, but when she ran her fingers along the underside, one board felt smoother than the rest, worn by hands rather than fire. A tiny sliver of lead had been wedged into the seam. She pried it loose with her mother's hairpin. Silas made a sound behind her. "Careful with that. It has opened more than hair." The board dropped into her palm. Inside the hollow lay a packet wrapped in oilcloth and tied with faded blue thread. Nora set it on the table as if it were breathing. When she unfolded the cloth, 3 proofs slid out, each burned along one edge, each printed unevenly, as though someone had been working under terrible haste. The first was a column of small-town notices: a church supper, a lost horse, a marriage announcement, a sale of winter coal. Ordinary things. Then Nora saw the spacing. Every third notice began with a widow's name. Every 5th line carried a legal phrase that did not belong in local chatter. Petition denied. Deed transferred. Declared incompetent. Signature witnessed. Property reassigned. The second proof carried a list of names. Not all of them were widows. Some were daughters. Some had no husbands at all. One name had been struck through so hard the paper had nearly torn. Martha Larkin. Nora knew that name. Everyone did. Mrs. Larkin kept a fabric stall near the end of Market Street and could measure a sleeve with one look. She had never smiled at Nora, not once, but when other women whispered, Mrs. Larkin never joined them. "This is a newspaper," Nora said. "No," Silas murmured. "It is a fuse." The third proof had only half a headline. When a woman is declared unfit, the rest had burned away. Nora touched the edge. Unfit for what? For owning what men had already chosen. Silas looked older with each answer. Nora wrapped the proofs and hid them inside her torn suitcase. Then she put on her damp coat and walked to Market Street before Silas could stop her. Fairhaven behaved differently when it wanted to watch without seeming to watch. Men turned their heads toward windows. Women lowered baskets more slowly than needed. By the time Nora reached the fabric stall, Mrs. Larkin had already stopped cutting ribbon. "I need to ask about a name," Nora said. Mrs. Larkin's scissors closed. "Then ask a clerk." "Your name was printed in the Bell and Sparrow shop." The woman's face emptied. Nora placed the second proof beneath a folded bolt of brown wool, hidden from the street. Mrs. Larkin looked down once. Her hand went to the counter and gripped it until her knuckles whitened. "Where did you get that?" "In the shop." "Then put it back in the grave. It is not dead." Mrs. Larkin leaned close. "Everything attached to that paper dies or disappears. My mother was attached to it." The woman looked at Nora fully then, and something like pity moved across her face. "Your mother was braver than the rest of us." Nora's breath caught. "You knew her." "I knew a woman who sent papers under doors at night. I knew better than to ask for her face." Before Nora could press further, Mrs. Larkin's eyes shifted past her shoulder. A black carriage had stopped across the street. Gideon Voss sat inside, gloved hands folded over his cane. He was not looking at fabric. He was looking at Mrs. Larkin. The woman folded the proof with one swift movement and pushed it back into Nora's hand. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "The first page is bait. The second page is a blade." "What second page?" Mrs. Larkin reached beneath the counter, tore a narrow strip from an old pattern sheet, and wrote 2 words so quickly the pencil snapped. "Back room." Then, louder, she said, "I have nothing for you, Miss Bellamy. Not thread, not cloth, not sympathy." Nora understood and stepped back. As she turned, Mrs. Larkin caught her sleeve for one heartbeat and pressed something small into her palm, a charred corner of paper. On it, in broken type, were 3 surviving words. Page 2 survived. Outside, Gideon's carriage door opened. Mrs. Larkin's voice trembled behind Nora. "Do not let him know you have the second tray." Nora did not run from Market Street. Running would tell Gideon Voss the paper in her palm mattered, so she walked with the slow, ordinary pace of a woman who had been refused cloth and sympathy. She kept her fist closed around the burned corner until the edges bit into her skin. Behind her, Gideon's carriage door clicked open. His voice drifted across the street, smooth as varnish. "Miss Bellamy." She did not turn. By the time she reached Printer's Lane, her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in the hand that held the scrap. Silas was waiting inside the shop, standing beside the empty press. "You went to Larkin." She knew. Of course she knew. Half the town knew enough to be afraid. Nora opened her palm. The charred paper had left black dust in the lines of her skin. Page 2 survived. "Second tray." Silas read it and sat down. "Where is it?" Nora asked. He shook his head once. "If I knew, I would have burned with it." That is not an answer. It is the answer of a coward who has had 20 years to practice. Nora turned away before anger stole her focus. The first tray from the loft sat on the composing table, its compartments labeled with women's names. Empty spaces, missing letters, names waiting to be set back into type. The second tray had to match it. She climbed to the loft again, slower this time, studying every beam, every stain, every bundle of old newsprint. The tray she had found had been hidden behind a support beam near the wall marked by smoke. If someone had hidden a second tray, it would not be far. Printers hid systems, not miracles. She searched beneath the canvas. Nothing. Behind the broken paper rack, nothing. Then she saw the ladder rail. The two letters cut with a hairpin, EB, were not simply initials. The scratch beneath them curved downward, like an arrow unfinished. Nora lowered herself halfway down the ladder and looked beneath the rail. A strip of black cloth had been wedged between the wood and the wall. She pulled. The cloth came free, followed by a shower of dust and a narrow wooden case, no larger than a Bible box. It struck the floor below and burst open. Lead type scattered across the boards. Silas bent toward it, then stopped as if touching it without permission would wake the dead. Nora knelt. This tray was not labeled with names. It was labeled with legal words. Incompetent. Reassigned. Witnessed. Petition. Guardian. Estate. Unfit. Deceased. Each word had its own compartment. Each compartment held the exact letters needed to print the accusation again. Nora understood then why Mrs. Larkin had called the first page bait and the second page a blade. The first page named the wounded. The second page named the weapon. She carried both trays to the composing table. When she set the second beside the first, the wood made a soft click. The table shifted. Silas stood so quickly, his chair scraped the floor. "What did you do?" "I did nothing." But the two trays had not merely rested side by side. Their lower corners fit into two shallow grooves burned dark by age. Nora pressed them down. Something inside the table released. A hidden drawer slid out beneath the composing stone. Not the hollow she had opened before. Deeper. Older. Waiting for both halves. Inside lay a packet wrapped in waxed cloth, a small brass chase, a folded list, and a stack of handwritten pages tied with blue thread faded nearly white. On the top page, written in a hand Nora knew from grocery lists, birthday notes, and the backs of recipe cards, were the words, "The Fairhaven Inheritance Fraud. A Saturday, extra prepared for public notice." Below it was a signature, Nora Bellamy. Nora's knees weakened. For a moment, the shop disappeared. She was 9 again, standing beside a kitchen table, while her mother turned a printer's letter in her palm and whispered that truth sometimes had to be read backward before it could be spoken forward. A. B. Not a printer's mark. Not a forgotten owner. Her mother. Silas removed his cap. "She never wanted you pulled into it," he said. Nora touched the signature with one finger. "You knew." "I knew a woman came here after dark with pages hidden under mending cloth. I knew she wrote better than every man who mocked this shop. I knew she was afraid only when she spoke of you. My father said she was quiet. She was careful. Men often mistake the two." Nora untied the blue thread. The pages were not wild accusations. They were precise, dated, cross-referenced. Widow petitions denied before hearings were held. Physicians listed on evaluations they never attended. Deeds transferred to guardians, who later sold land to families represented by Gideon Voss. Daughters recorded as deceased while still living in the county. Women declared unfit within days of their husbands' burials. Beside each case, Eleanor had written where the proof could be found. Court seal reversed on page 12. Witness signature formed from reused type. Compare Voss filing ledger. Spring term. Ask M. Larkin about the blue deed. Do not publish without second list. Nora's breath caught on the last line. The folded list beneath the manuscript was page 2, not a newspaper page. A list of men, judges, clerks, physicians, guardians, buyers, and one name repeated in the margin 4 times. Gideon Voss. The room tilted. Before this hour, Nora had wanted to keep a roof over her head. She had wanted to prove the shop was not worthless. She had wanted to understand why men feared drawers of lead. Now the wish changed shape. She no longer wanted only to survive in the burned shop. She wanted to print what the fire had failed to kill. Silas must have seen the decision in her face. "No," he said. "Not yet. You stole the gears." He closed his eyes. "I did." The admission did not surprise her. It still hurt. "Why?" "Because your mother had pages, names, courage, and no witness willing to stand beside her. She meant to print on Saturday morning. The fire came Friday night. And you ran. I carried out what I could. Then I let them call me drunk, careless, guilty. It was easier than saying I had been too late." Nora looked at the manuscript. "Where are the gears?" "In a stove flue behind the bindery wall. Then we get them. We get witnesses first." A knock sounded from the front door. Not Gideon's cane. Harder. Familiar. Nora slipped the manuscript back into the drawer, but not before Silas's face warned her she had already lost time. Her father's voice came through the door. "Nora, open this at once." She looked at Silas. He whispered, "Hide the signature." Her father struck the door again. "I know what you found." Nora did not move. Rain had begun outside, soft at first, then steady. It touched the roof like fingers on paper. Her father's voice lowered. "If you have your mother's piece called the Fairhaven inheritance fraud, you will give it to me before Voss learns it is still whole." The title froze the room. Nora had not spoken it aloud, not to Silas, not to Mrs. Larkin, not to anyone. She opened the drawer again and looked at the signature, the blue thread, the page 2 list, the handwriting that had survived ash, fear, and years of silence. Then she looked toward the locked door. The man who had forbidden her to read backward type had known exactly what her mother had written with it. Her father did not wait for her answer. The latch rattled once, then again harder. "Nora." She slid the drawer shut with her hip and covered the seam with a sheet of warped newsprint. Silas moved faster than she expected for an old man. He swept the page 2 list beneath the composing stone, then stood with his back to it, breathing through his mouth. Nora opened the door only a hand's width. Her father stood in the rain without a hat. Water ran down the sides of his face, but his eyes were dry and furious. "Give it to me," he said. "What?" "Do not play ignorance with me. If that manuscript is still here, you do not understand what it can do." "To Gideon?" "To you." Behind the anger, Nora heard something worse. "Fear. You knew my mother wrote it." His mouth tightened. "Your mother wrote many things she should have burned." Nora felt the old obedience rise in her like a reflex. Then she remembered the list of women marked unfit, dead, incompetent, reassigned. She remembered her mother's handwriting, steady and careful, refusing to disappear. "No," she said. Her father looked past her shoulder and saw Silas. "You," he said. Silas did not lower his eyes. "Nathaniel, you should have stayed buried with your guilt. I tried. It did not take." Her father stepped forward, but Nora held the door. "If you came to help, say what you know. I came to stop you from making your mother's mistake." Her mistake was trusting frightened men. The sentence struck him. For a moment, he looked less like a judge of her life, and more like a man standing before a grave he had avoided too long. Then, carriage wheels stopped behind him. Gideon Voss had come without his umbrella this time. Sheriff Crow stood beside him with 2 deputies and a folded paper sealed in red wax. Nora's father closed his eyes. Gideon smiled at the whole scene. "How fortunate. All interested parties gathered before I had to send for them." Sheriff Crow held up the paper. "Order of inspection and temporary closure." "Closure?" Nora said. "Until ownership and safety are clarified." Gideon's voice softened. "There appears to be an irregularity in yesterday's auction. Miss Bellamy may have purchased this structure under incomplete notice. For her own protection, Nothing inside should be disturbed. Now he worries about disturbed things, Silas muttered. The deputies pushed the door open. Nora stepped back because being knocked down would help no one. Sheriff Crow entered first. The other moved toward the type cases without being told. That told Nora enough. They know where to look, she said. Gideon removed his gloves finger by finger. Men search where dangerous materials are stored. Then why is no one looking at the roof? His eyes flicked to her. Cold, quick. The deputy at the type cases lifted drawers, shook them, dumped damaged lead into a sack. Nora heard each fall like a tooth pulled from a mouth. She forced herself not to look at the composing table, not at the seam, not at the paper hidden beneath stone. Her father watched her watch nothing. That was when she understood. He could still ruin her without saying a word. "Father," she said quietly, "if you know this is wrong, do not stand there like weather." His face darkened, but he did not speak. From the loft, the deputy called, "Found one." He came down with the first wooden tray, the one labeled with women's names. Its empty compartments stared from the open box. Gideon gave a small sigh, almost tender. A sad curiosity, no evidentiary value, possibly stolen property. "It was hidden here," Nora said, "in a building not yet proven to be legally yours." Sheriff Crow reached for the tray. Silas moved before Nora could. "Careful." The sheriff paused. "You attached to it?" "I made some of those labels." Every eye turned to him. Gideon's smile vanished. Silas swallowed, then looked at Nora. She could see what it cost him to stand in the open after 20 years of crouching inside blame. "I set the type for the Saturday Extra," he said. Nora Bellamy brought the copy. Martha Larkin brought one deed. A clerk from Voss's office brought the filing dates before he lost his nerve. The fire came before dawn. Gideon laughed once. A drunk printer's confession to a dead woman's gossip. How moving. "Then why are your men stealing the alphabet?" Nora asked. The second deputy froze. In his sack, beneath loose type, Nora saw a row of familiar compartments from the second tray. Legal words, petition, estate, guardian, unfit. He had not taken all of it, only the words that could make the fraud readable. Nora stepped toward him. Sheriff Crow caught her arm. "Do not make this uglier. It already has your fingerprints on it." Her father's head snapped toward the sheriff. Gideon saw the movement. "Remove the hazardous trays," he said quickly. The deputy carried the sack outside. The loss hit Nora in the chest. Without those letters, the manuscript could accuse. It could not reproduce the method. It could not show how legal words had been reused like weapons. When the room finally emptied, Gideon lingered on the threshold. "You are young," he said. "There is still time to choose a life not built on ashes." Nora looked at the black streak on his cuff where his sleeve had brushed the type case. "And there is still time for you to fear paper." For the first time, his courtesy left him entirely. "You have no idea how many names can be ruined before yours is even heard." Then he was gone. The seal went across the door at sunset. Nora broke it at dusk. Silas did not stop her. Her father had gone with Gideon, saying nothing. And inside, the shop looked violated. Drawers hung open. Ash was tracked over the floor. The wall plank had been torn wider, but the hidden drawer beneath the composing stone remained untouched. "They missed it," Nora whispered. "No," Silas said. "They hurried. There is a difference." He went to the stove and knelt. From inside the cold flue, behind a loose brick, he pulled out a cloth pouch. Nora expected the missing gears. Instead, he handed her the main gear, the substitute cog, and a small tin box of type wrapped in oilcloth. "I kept these apart," he said, "so no one frightened enough could print too soon." Nora opened the tin. Names. Not all, but enough. Martha Larkin, Ruth Vale, Anna Mercer, Nora Bellamy. Her mother's name sat in lead, cold and undeniable. Silas's voice broke. Your mother did not lack courage. She lacked one living witness willing to stand beside her. Nora closed the box. Then we find one. Silas looked toward Market Street, where lamps were coming on one by one. There is one, he said. If Gideon has not reached her first. Nora and Silas left Printer's Lane before dawn, carrying the tin box of names beneath a sack of stale bread. They did not use the main street. Gideon's men would expect Nora to march toward the courthouse with anger for armor. Instead, Silas led her behind the livery, past rain barrels and kitchen doors, through alleys where cookstove ash mixed with mud. "The witness," Nora whispered. "Who is she?" "Anna Mercer." Nora knew the name from the tin. "One of the women?" "One of the clerks." That stopped her. Silas looked back. Do not decide what a person is from where fear made her stand. Anna Mercer lived above the milliner's back room, in 2 rooms with curtains always drawn. When she opened the door, she held a lamp in one hand and a sewing shear in the other. Then she saw Silas. "No," she said. Nora stepped forward. "Mrs. Mercer, my mother wrote your name." The shear lowered an inch. "My name was written in many places it should not have been," Anna said. "That is why I am poor enough to rent air over hats." Silas removed his cap. "Anna." The second list survived. Her face changed as if a chair had vanished beneath her. "Then Voss will burn the town before he lets it speak." "He already burned 1 room," Nora said. Anna looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time Nora saw not a bitter recluse, but a woman who had once known exactly how paper could ruin a life. "I copied filings in Gideon Voss's office," Anna said. "I saw widow petitions arrive with one date and leave with another. I saw guardians appointed before hearings were called. I saw seals pressed onto papers after the judge had gone home." "Can you prove it?" Anna went to a trunk beneath the window. From inside a folded quilt, she drew out a flat packet wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay scraps of legal forms, 2 receipts, and a small round court seal cast in brass. Nora paused before touching it. "Why do you have this?" "Because the one at the courthouse is not the only one." Silas swore softly. Anna turned the seal over. On its underside, the county letters were reversed badly. One letter had a nick across its foot. "The forged papers carry that nick," Anna said. "Your mother saw it." She said a lie repeated with the same flaw becomes a signature. Nora took out the manuscript pages and found the note her mother had written. Court seal reversed on page 12. Her throat tightened. "Page 12, she whispered. Anna's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "Eleanor was the first person who asked me whether I wanted my name back." A knock sounded below. All 3 froze. From the street came a young man's voice. "Ma?" Anna went to the curtain and lifted it with one finger. Relief and fear crossed her face together. "My son." Anna opened the door. A man of about 22 climbed the stairs in his work apron, flower on his sleeve, terror in his eyes. "They dismissed me," he said. "Mr. Voss spoke to Mr. Harlan at the mill. Said there may be trouble with our family name. Said if you sign a statement that you never saw Mrs. Bellamy's papers, I may have my post back." Anna closed her eyes. The room shrank. Nora knew that kind of weapon. It did not point at the heart. It pointed at the table, the rent, the child. "Mrs. Mercer," Nora said quietly, "you do not have to answer now." Anna laughed once, empty. That is what fear loves. A little more time. Her son looked from Nora to Silas. "Is this about old land papers?" "Ma, please. We cannot eat old land." "No," Anna said, and her voice broke. "But we have starved for 20 years because of them." She reached into the packet and took out a thin blue deed. "This belonged to my sister. She was recorded as dead while she was standing in the next room. Voss's office transferred her husband's field to a guardian who never met her. When she fought, they called her hysterical and unfit. She died taking laundry from families living on land that had been hers." Nora held the brass seal under the lamp and pressed it lightly into a smear of soot on scrap paper. The mark appeared reversed and flawed, the nick clear as a cut. Then she opened one of the burned proofs from the print shop. There, beside a forged witness statement, was the same nick, the same false seal. Anna's son sat down slowly. "They did that?" Anna put a hand on his shoulder. "They did it because people like me signed what we were told to sign." Nora looked at the seal, the proof, the manuscript, and the tin box of names. The pieces no longer felt like fragments. They felt like a machine beginning to move. "We need you to speak at the town meeting," Nora said. Anna flinched. Before she could answer, boots sounded on the stairs. Not 1 pair. 3. Silas grabbed the lamp and blew it out. The room fell into gray morning. A voice called from below, official and bored. "Anna Mercer? Sheriff Crow has questions about stolen county property." Anna looked at the brass seal in Nora's hand. Nora wrapped it in her handkerchief and slipped it inside her bodice beside her mother's hairpin. In that instant, the cold metal touched the silver pin, and Nora remembered the forged signature on the deed in Eleanor's notes. The curves were too even, too mechanical. Not written. Printed. She looked at the type in Silas's tin, at the missing legal words, at the seal that had copied authority, and understood something worse. Her mother's signature had not only been forged, it had been built from type. Sheriff Crow did not find the brass seal. He found Anna Mercer's sewing shears, Silas Gray's empty toolbox, and one burned proof Nora had left on the table because she wanted him to find something that looked important enough to satisfy him. He held it up between two fingers. Stolen county evidence. Anna's son looked ready to faint. Nora stepped forward before fear could choose for anyone. That is a newspaper proof. It contains county language. So does the courthouse wall. The sheriff's eyes hardened, but Gideon Voss was not with him. That mattered. Gideon had sent pressure, not himself, because he still did not know how much Nora had carried out under her coat. Anna saw the same thing. When the sheriff left with the proof, she locked the door, then turned to Nora with a face as gray as morning. "I will speak," she said, "but if my son loses work forever, then the paper will print his name among the people this town tried to starve into obedience," Nora said. It was not comfort. It was all she had. By late afternoon, Fairhaven's town hall filled faster than it had for elections, funerals, or tax hearings. Men stood along the walls. Women sat together in the back rows, hands folded tight over purses and gloves. The air smelled of wet wool, coal smoke, and anticipation sharpened into cruelty. Nora entered through the side door with Silas on one side and Anna Mercer on the other. The room changed when it saw her. A disowned daughter did not walk into town hall with witnesses. She came to apologize, beg, or be judged. Nora did none of those things. On the raised platform sat Gideon Voss, Sheriff Crow, 2 councilmen, and her father. Nathaniel Bellamy did not look at her. His hands rested on his knees, still as carved wood. Gideon rose first. "Miss Bellamy," he said, voice carrying easily. "No one here wishes to embarrass you further." A low murmur agreed. Nora set her satchel on the front table. "Then this will be the first kindness Fairhaven has managed all week." A few women looked down to hide their faces. Gideon's smile held. "You have been through an emotional rupture. You were cast out of your father's home, purchased a dangerous structure under distress, and have since associated with a man long believed responsible for the Bell and Sparrow fire." Silas's jaw tightened. Gideon continued. "Before any wild claim is heard, we must address whether Miss Bellamy has standing. The auction notice was incomplete. The sale may be void. If the print shop is not legally hers, any materials removed from it belong to the county pending review." There it was. Take the ground, and the voice standing on it would fall. Sheriff Crow placed a paper on the table. "Temporary suspension of ownership." Nora did not touch it. "You found that problem after I refused to sell." Gideon sighed. "Suspicion is not evidence." "No," Nora said, "but patterns are." She opened the satchel and removed 3 sheets, not the manuscript. Copies. Hand-set and uneven, printed that morning on the wounded press after Silas replaced the gears while the town still slept. A rustle moved through the hall. Gideon saw the ink and went still. Nora held up the first sheet. "This is a proof from the Bell and Sparrow print shop. It lists women declared unfit, deceased, or incompetent before their petitions were heard." "Forgery," Gideon said. Nora held up the second. "This is a court seal impression from a brass die kept outside the courthouse. It carries a nick in the county lettering." Anna stepped forward, pale but upright. "I copied filings in Mr. Voss's office. That nick appears on papers that were not sealed in court." Gideon did not look at her. "Mrs. Mercer was dismissed years ago for irregular conduct." "My irregular conduct," Anna said, voice trembling, "was refusing to change a date after midnight." The back rows stirred. Sheriff Crow slapped the table. "This meeting will not become theater." "It already was," Nora said. "For years, men in good coats played guardians, women played dead." The words hit harder than she expected. Somewhere in the back, Mrs. Larkin stood. Gideon saw her and adjusted quickly. "You have scraps, rumors, a disgraced printer, and a resentful clerk. What you do not have is the original manuscript of the Fairhaven inheritance fraud." Silence dropped. Nora felt every eye move to her. Gideon had said the title. Not the manuscript. Not your mother's paper. The title. She turned slowly. "Who told you that name?" For the first time that day, Gideon Voss made no answer. Nora reached into the satchel and drew out a printed page headed with the title he had just spoken. Not the original. A copy. This title was never published, she said. It was written in a drawer beneath a composing table and tied in blue thread. I never said it aloud in this hall. Mrs. Mercer never saw the title. Silas Gray did not speak it in public. Yet Mr. Voss knew it. Gideon's face changed by less than a breath, but the room felt it. Sheriff Crow stepped forward. Hand over all documents for county review. No, that was not a request. He reached for the satchel. Nora lifted it away, and 3 women in the back stood at once. Mrs. Larkin, Mrs. Vale from the dry goods counter. A widow Nora had seen only once at church. Not heroes. Not yet. But standing, Sheriff Crow stopped because the room had seen him reach. Gideon spoke quietly. You are making enemies you cannot survive. Nora laid another sheet on the table. This is the forged signature of Nora Bellamy, my mother, on a statement withdrawing her claim to a parcel she never owned and never signed away. The letters are not written. They are built from type. The same damaged E, the same crooked B, the same shortened crossbar on the T appears in filings from 3 women whose land later passed through clients represented by Gideon Voss. A councilman leaned over the page despite himself. Nora put the brass seal impression beside it. Same seal flaw. Same type flaw. Same office. Gideon's voice sharpened. Enough. This girl was thrown from her home for defiance and now seeks revenge by dragging her dead mother through scandal. Anna Mercer stepped back. Nora saw her hand shake. Then Anna's son appeared at the side wall, still in his flour-stained apron. He had come despite fear. He looked at his mother, and that almost undid her. I cannot, Anna whispered. Gideon heard it and softened instantly. Mrs. Mercer, no one will blame a mother for choosing her child over old bitterness. Anna closed her eyes. The second obstacle rose like a wall. Without Anna, the seal was suspicious. With Anna, it became a door. Nora wanted to beg. Instead, she took the tin box from Silas and opened it on the table. Lead names gleamed under the lamps. Martha Larkin, she read. Anna Mercer. Ruth Vale. Nora Bellamy. She placed each name in a row. These were not women looking for revenge. They were women this town taught to whisper. My mother wrote them down because no court would listen to them separately. But a printed page can make scattered whispers stand in one room. Anna's son stepped forward. Ma, he said, voice shaking. If they can take my job for what you know, they can take my life for what I don't. Anna looked at him, then at Nora, then at the brass seal. I saw Gideon Voss press that false seal, she said. The hall erupted. Sheriff Crow lunged for the satchel. This time Nora let him take it. He opened it and found nothing but blank paper. From the back rows came the sound of pages unfolding. Copies. Dozens of them. Mrs. Larkin had passed them beneath shawls, into baskets, under gloves. Every woman who had entered with folded hands now held a printed sheet. Gideon stared at the room as if the walls themselves had betrayed him. Nora looked toward the platform. Her father had not moved through any of it. Then, slowly, Nathaniel Bellamy stood. The murmurs faded. For one breath, Nora did not know whether he would protect his daughter or bury her mother a second time. Nathaniel Bellamy stood with one hand on the table, the other curled so tightly his knuckles had gone white. For 20 years, Fairhaven had known him as a man who measured every word before spending it. Now everyone waited to see which debt he would pay. He looked first at Nora, not with pride, not with apology, with the fear of a man who had guarded a locked room too long and now heard the hinges breaking. Then he looked at Gideon Voss. I saw that title once, Nathaniel said. Gideon's face hardened. Careful. Nathaniel gave a bitter little laugh. That is what you told me then. The room held still. My wife brought pages home from the print shop, Nathaniel said. I found them in a flour bin. I read enough to know she had named men who could ruin us. I told her to burn it. She refused. Nora felt the words enter her like cold iron. You told her to stop, she said. I begged her. You locked her notes away. Yes, the admission did not cleanse him. It only made the wound visible. Gideon rose. Mr. Bellamy is grieving and confused. Nathaniel turned on him. No, I was confused when I believed silence would protect my house. I was grieving when she died. I was a coward before both. A sound moved through the women in the back rows. Not approval, but recognition. Nathaniel removed a yellowed envelope from his coat. I kept one thing, he said. Not because I was brave, because I was afraid to destroy the last proof that she had been right. Inside was a receipt from Gideon Voss's office, dated the morning before the fire. Payment for emergency court notices. Attached to it was a slip in Nora Bellamy's handwriting. If the shop burns, ask why notices were paid for before any hearing was called. Gideon stepped forward. That paper is stolen, Mrs. Larkin said from the back. Then charge us all. We have copies now. Sheriff Crow looked around and, for the first time, counted the room incorrectly. Too many witnesses, too many pages, too many names no longer hidden in drawers. One councilman cleared his throat. Mr. Voss, County Review should proceed through the circuit judge. Gideon stared at him as if betrayal were a language he had taught too well. Nora did not feel victory. Not yet. Victory did not arrive like trumpets. It arrived like a locked door opening onto dust. The order suspending her ownership was withdrawn, pending review. Sheriff Crow had to leave the printed copies in public custody, with 3 women and 1 councilman signing as witnesses. Anna Mercer's statement was recorded before she could be frightened into taking it back. The brass seal was wrapped, marked, and placed in a box Mrs. Larkin refused to let out of her sight. Gideon Voss left the hall without his hat. Outside, rain had stopped. The street shone under lamplight. People did not cheer. Some avoided Nora's eyes. Some women touched her sleeve as they passed, briefly, as if checking that she was real. Anna's son came to her last. I lost the mill, he said. I know. He looked toward his mother. But Mr. Harlan lost 12 customers before supper. Maybe I can bake for people who still have appetites. It was the first almost smile Nora had seen all day. Her father waited near the steps. For a moment, she wished he would kneel, weep, become the kind of father stories knew how to forgive. Instead, he stood with rainwater on his coat and guilt in his hands. I cannot ask you home, he said. No, Nora replied. You cannot. Your mother was not quiet. I know. She was afraid for you. I know that too. He looked back at the hall, where pages still passed from hand to hand. I should have stood beside her. Yes. He flinched. Nora almost softened. Then she remembered a suitcase in the mud, books locked away, her mother flattened into a portrait with folded hands. Do not stand beside me now to feel clean, she said. Stand where the record needs you. Nathaniel bowed his head. I will testify. It was not enough to repair the years, but it was enough to keep Gideon from burying the next hearing. When everyone finally left, Nora did not follow her father's buggy. She did not return to any house that had taught her silence as shelter. She walked back to Printer's Lane with Silas, Anna, and Mrs. Larkin carrying the box of copies between them. The burned shop waited at the end of the street, dark against the clearing sky. For the first time, Nora saw not a ruin, but a press room waiting for morning. Morning did not make the print shop beautiful. It only made it honest. The first light came through the patched roof in narrow beams, touching the ash, the warped floorboards, the scorched wall, and the press that had survived more than fire. Nora stood in the doorway, with a broom in her hand, and watched dust turn gold in the air. Silas arrived with a bundle of rags before breakfast. Mrs. Larkin came next, carrying a basket of bread and 2 bolts of plain muslin for curtains. Anna Mercer brought the brass seal box wrapped in brown paper, though she would not let it out of her sight. Her son came with them, sleeves rolled, flour still under his fingernails. No one called it a celebration. That would have made it too simple. They worked instead. They scrubbed soot from the front windows until Printer's Lane appeared through the glass again. They pulled ruined paper from the shelves and stacked what could still be used. Silas reset the gears with a patience that looked almost like prayer. Mrs. Larkin measured the broken counter for a new cloth cover and muttered that even a place of justice should not look like it had slept in a ditch. Anna sat at the composing table and copied her statement 3 times by hand. Once for the circuit judge, once for herself, once for any woman who might someday be told she had imagined what had been done to her. Nora found a small frame in the back room, its glass cracked but whole enough. Inside had been an old advertisement for patent tonic. She removed it and replaced it with the first clean sheet printed from the repaired press. It bore only 2 lines. The Bell and Sparrow Press. Restored for public notice. Below that, in smaller type, she set 2 names. Nora Bellamy. Nora Bellamy. When Silas saw it, He turned away and pretended to adjust the ink roller. Nora did not stop him. Some grief deserved privacy. By noon, people began coming to the door. Not the men who had laughed at the auction. Not at first. The first was a widow from the East Road with a deed folded so many times the creases had nearly cut through the paper. She asked, without looking up, whether anyone there could read a clause about guardianship. Nora took the paper gently. "I can read it with you," she said. "Not for you." "With you?" The woman sat. Then came Mrs. Vale from the dry goods counter, the same woman who had refused to meet Nora's eyes days earlier. She brought no apology. She brought a ledger belonging to her sister, who had signed a paper she never understood. "I was afraid," Mrs. Vale said. Nora looked at her for a long moment. "Then sit down afraid." By evening, the shop held more voices than it had held in 20 years. No one shouted. No one needed to. Pages were unfolded. Names were spoken carefully. Dates were checked. Women who had once whispered in doorways leaned over the composing table and pointed to lines that had stolen orchards, rooms, wells, burial plots, and wages. The press did not solve everything. It could not return the dead. It could not give Anna back the years she had spent above the milliner's shop. It could not make Nora's father young enough to choose differently, or her mother alive enough to see the page with both their names. But it could do one thing the town had feared. It could make silence visible. 3 days later, a new notice appeared in the front window. Public reading hours. Petitions copied. Notices printed. Names recorded correctly. Someone had scratched a line beneath it in pencil. Even women's names. Nora saw it and left it there. Nathaniel Bellamy came once, near closing, carrying a box of Eleanor's old notebooks. He set it on the threshold because he had not yet earned the right to cross easily. "I found these where I locked them," he said. Nora looked at the box. Then at him. "Leave them," she said. He nodded. His face folded with pain, but he did not ask her to soften it for him. Before he went, he touched the doorframe of the shop, not like a man claiming it, but like one asking forgiveness from wood. After he left, Nora opened the box. The notebook smelled faintly of lavender, dust, and the closed rooms of her childhood. Between 2 pages, she found a strip of paper in her mother's hand. If Nora ever reads this, let her know the letters were never meant to cage her. They were meant to give her a door. Nora sat very still. Then she removed the silver hairpin from her collar. For years, she had carried it hidden against her skin, a small private proof that her mother had existed beyond the portrait. Now she placed it beside the press, near the chase, where anyone who looked closely could see the scratched letters. A. B. Not a secret anymore. A signature. That night, when the last lamp burned low, Nora pulled one final sheet through the press herself. The machine groaned, caught, pressed, and released. The page landed in the tray with a soft breath of paper. At the top was the title her mother had never lived to publish: The Fairhaven Inheritance Fraud. Below it was a new line, printed by Nora Bellamy, daughter of Eleanor Bellamy, at the Bell and Sparrow Press. Nora touched the ink before it dried. The world had told her a disobedient daughter deserved no house, no name, and no voice of her own. But in the shop they had called worthless, the press kept moving. And every new page that fell into the tray said otherwise.